Our state has some incredible problems. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker. I'm here to talk about that with you and talk about the trends that have shaped this state and dragged us in one direction or another. We're not really we're not realizing the dream we had way back in the early 2000s or even around 2008 or 9 or 10. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker. Welcome to WowBiz Nebraska. We're going to get it on right now. I'm not done. I've just begun. Thanks for joining me here on WowBiz Nebraska. I'm Lynn Hinderrocker. You know, you've heard me talk about urban natural design in the past. It's something I visited about maybe 13, 15 weeks ago, talking about the confluence of opposites in building design as well as in interior design. Oftentimes it kind of comes out in terms of buildings, the exterior buildings, and there's wood and there's metal. There's wood and glass. So you see a tremendous contrast. This is a major trend in architecture, building design, construction, and so on. Now, I've talked about it a lot. I'm very enthused about it. It's a major trend. And you're seeing it pop up here and there, but the word urban natural has never been coined before. We happen to own that word, and we think that it describes a lot of what you're seeing as you drive down the street on Main Street in your city and in your community. I want to talk to you. I haven't mentioned urban natural before, and I'm going to move away from it shortly, but I do have to talk to you about a book. And a book that is called The Great Indoors. And it's a fascinating book. You know, I've kind of put this topic to the side. I haven't talked much about it for a number of weeks. And here it is. It's popped up into my consciousness. And it's called The Great Indoors. As I mentioned to you before, it was covered in the Wall Street Journal just today, reviewed. But here's the quote. I'm not going to linger on this, but I want you to really get this. It describes urban natural furnishings and interior better than I could do it. Here it is. It's called, quote, intelligent environments that layer technology into architecture, can improve the function of organizations and the well-being of individuals. Think about this now. The interior of a home or a building or an office can actually impact your sense of well-being. Now, I've talked about this before on the air. I'm not sure everybody fully grasped it or even believed me, but here we are, that very same principle being quoted right here in this new book called The Great Indoors. And it's all about urban natural design. Of course, they don't use the word, but they talk about how high contrast, maybe chairs made out of wood and metal. That'd be a very good example. You see a lot of that in office lobbies and so on. Can actually, the contrast between the two surfaces, the materials and the colors, can actually stimulate a hormonal release in your visual cortex. Believe it or not, this has all been proven. And then dopamine, which is a very positive hormone in all human beings' bodies, flows through your body. You feel slightly better, in better mood when you're around high contrast furniture and desks and so on and so forth. So there we go. If you didn't believe me before, this quote, intelligent environments improve the function of organizations. Think of it now, entire teams now need to be thinking about urban natural design inside their offices and the well-being of individuals. So important, so important. But the real book I want to talk to you about today, the real book, I'm going to turn it around here, is called The Startup Way. The Startup Way. It's written by a gentleman named Eric Ries. Now, Eric is a well-respected entrepreneurial trainer. He helps aspiring entrepreneurs get their plans together and so on. But more importantly, he helps established companies, well-regarded, 20-year-old, 30-year-old companies, to think differently, to think like a startup, to think innovatively. In fact, I'm going to take a quote here from the very back, and then I'm going to go somewhere with you, so stick with me. It says, Eric Ries just might be the new Peter Drucker. That's a big compliment. Said this masterpiece, this book called The Startup Way, unpacks what it takes to achieve innovation at scale in modern organizations. Let me say that phrase again, achieve innovation at scale. Tough to do. Now, innovators oftentimes are differentiators, and they create these cool little crafty products and something kind of special and unique and so on. And oftentimes they're not products that you can scale, and have from coast to coast. But I'm going to give you a story that's over 35 years old. I was a part of it that speaks also about that principle of achieving innovation at scale. Every single one of you is probably saying, God, how do we get out of this pandemic passivity and this inertia and things aren't really happening for us? I don't know really what we should be doing strategically and so on. Listen carefully. In the spring of 1987, I was in Dallas. I was working for a large advertising agency at the time, but only been there about 6 months maybe. So I was a little bit insecure in my position. And I had about 500 Taco Bell restaurants that I was responsible for insofar as their advertising and their marketing and all the local markets from Omaha to Louisiana, all the way down to Corpus Christi and so on. But I only had one franchisee. All the other stores were owned by the Taco Bell Corporation out of Irvine, California. But I got a phone call in March of 1987 from my client, this franchisee, and he said, Lynn, he says, I want you to come see me tomorrow. He says, I've been struggling here with these 5 restaurants in Lawton, Oklahoma, and Wichita Falls. He says, I can't really, I'm not doing well. The competition in these markets is so strong. He says, I'm trying to deal with a Mexican family, the QSR restaurants, and they have their own children working for them. Their fixed costs are quite low. And he said, I just can't compete with them. He says, I got to pay royalties, obviously, to the parent company, Taco Bell, out of Irvine. He said, I can't do it. He says, but I got an idea. Please come see me. I thought, oh boy, here we go. You know, this is a bad thing. You know, it's not going to be easy. So I got in the car and I drove to Lawton, Oklahoma the very next day. This is again in late March of '87. And he's sitting in the back of this Taco Bell restaurant. There's a number, like I said, he has 5 of them. He said, you know, yesterday when I called you, I had 2 bankers out in the hall. They want to repossess all 5 of my restaurants. I convinced them to give me 60 days. I said, wow, that's rough, Ron. He says, but I got an idea. He says, I know this franchisee for Taco Bell in New Orleans. And he does very well with his restaurants, except on Sundays, he doesn't do well at all. Hardly anybody even comes in the restaurant. And he wasn't comfortable with that. And he said, so what he did was he took a regular crunchy taco that we all have seen and eaten before. He said it was, by the way, it was priced at like 79 cents at that particular time. And he says he lowered the cost of that taco, the retail price, to 49 cents. And I said, wow, probably gave up a lot of profit on that. He says, well, he said, what he does, he calls it 49-cent Taco Sundays. And all these families come in after Mass, you know, and they come into the restaurant and they bring the kids and so on. They can afford to feed a large family. And he said he does very well. He says, I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to expand it rapidly. He says, I'm going to apply it to a number of other products, 5 or 6 other items, bean burrito and a taco and a couple other items there, and create a 6-item segment on the menu. He said, I'm going to do this without asking anybody or talking to corporate or the regional managers or any of those people. He said, I'm just between you and me, I'm going to do this. He said, and if it doesn't work, you're not going to have a client anymore, among other things. And I said, okay. He said, the thing is, what you've got to do is you've got to come up with a way to promote it, right? You've got to figure that out. I said, okay, well, I'm sure we can come up with something. I said, as I was driving back to Dallas that afternoon, I was a little bit nervous. But, you know, if you've got 6 items that are 49 cents, it's not that tough. I said, we'll call it the 49ers. That's all. We'll just call it the 49ers. That'll be easy. People will get it. Great. So we approved that idea, and we worked with my team. I had a small staff, 4 or 5 people, and we created advertising, we did marketing, and we did the TV and the radio and the newspaper and the flyers and tray liners that you obviously lay on the tray as you serve the person. And we got it all in place in record time, maybe 2 weeks or so. We got it all done. And it was like, wow. Now, I really wasn't that hopeful. I thought, I don't know if this is going to work. You know, my boss isn't going to like this. We're going to lose this client. I called him about 3 weeks later. And I said, how's it going? He said, it's going great. He says, we got a 60% increase in sales in all the stores, give or take. And it's holding. It's not peaking and going down after 4 weeks. Normally you'd think that maybe. He said, Lenny says, here's the real interesting thing. It's not the young core users, the people who like to go to Taco Bell a lot. They tend to be young folks in their teens and 20s. He said, it's the military that's coming. These are fixed income military retirees. And they're coming for lunch and they're coming for dinner. They're coming in and eating 49-cent tacos every day. It's amazing. He says, thank you, thank you, thank you. I couldn't believe it. It's an amazing thing. Now, the word began to spread throughout the Taco Bell system. Now, the people in Irvine weren't thrilled about the fact that he did this on his own. It's kind of a rogue move, right? But the royalties were kind of picking up again. The money was flowing. And I was getting phone calls from around the entire country within the Taco Bell system. Hey, what are you doing down there? Maybe we should talk about doing that up here. Now, this obviously morphed into the value menu that everybody is familiar with today. That was over 35 years ago. And of course, they stepped up the prices incrementally over time. But it was a $1 billion turnaround for Taco Bell over a 3.5-year period. It was actually voted the most dynamic and dramatic turnaround in the history of fast food after 3.5 years. It was an amazing thing, and what had occurred to me at that time is how unfortunate it was that things had to get that desperate and that dire for him to have the courage and to be so bold and say, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. If it doesn't work, I'm done anyway, right? And so I'm going to come back and talk to you about innovation at scale, because as you all know, that was a very small innovation. It scaled up, right? And over 2,500 restaurants adopted the value menu over time, over 3.5 years. And it was, of course, revised, refined, a number of things. Eventually it was called the Border Menu, as you might recall, back in the early 90s, late 89, 90, 91. So my name is Lynn Hinderhocker. I just thought you'd enjoy hearing the real story behind the value menu. And by the way, how did he get it done profitably? Because beans, listen to all you supply side people, beans are cheaper than hamburger. Beans are cheaper than hamburger. So he could go ahead, play these pricing games, sell up at the counter, obviously, but he was already working at a 25 or 30% margin. McDonald's today works on a 10% margin, maybe a 12% margin. So there was definitely some leeway there, some latitude on profit margin. He did a smart thing. He leveraged what he had that nobody else in the fast food industry had. As a result of that, the value revolution began. And that's right. You got the inside scoop right now. Thank you so much for listening to the first half of our show. My name is Lynn Hinderhocker. This is WowBiz Nebraska. We cover all the trends and strategic ideas that are emerging and being actualized in the state of Nebraska. Believe it or not, there are some very unique things happening in this state. And by the way, why? We're going to talk about this in the second half of the show, because Nebraska, along with some other business or states in the upper Midwest, struggles, right, with growth, population growth, attracting and retaining youth, young professionals, and so on into the state. They got a lot of problems in that regard, and I believe it's finally time to attack those problems head on and innovate at scale. I'll talk to you a little bit about the earthquake of 1989 when we get around to that topic. But this is WowBiz Nebraska. I'm Lynn Hinderhocker, and thank you for tuning in. There's a lot to talk with you about, and I want to visit with you a little bit about a company here in the Omaha, Nebraska area. You may have heard of them before. They're called Growth Dynamics. Growth Dynamics is a marketing, consulting, and strategic development firm that can help companies, been doing it for a long time, by the way, help companies reposition themselves, rethink their identity. Who are we really, and who do we need to be? Who do we need to be to attract the emerging customer, typically the younger customer who gauges and looks at vendors and suppliers a little bit differently, perhaps than somebody 50, 60, or older, right? There's some different criteria typically that they apply. Now, Growth Dynamics is a planning firm, most definitely, and right now, as you probably know, many companies are trying to figure out when do we come out of the house, right? When do we meet? Maybe we do it via Zoom, of course. But what are we going to be doing in September, October, November, December? How do we try to recap the terrible losses, economic losses that we've sustained since March, April, and May with the COVID-19 pandemic crisis that we're still involved with, obviously. And many people are like uncertain. There's a sense of skepticism, scarcity, and abundance. A very interesting time that we're in right now. It's really like a passage or a bridge time. And this is exactly when growth dynamics can be most effective for you. They work on revenue, they work on culture, they work on leadership, and growth dynamics are change managers. So I want to suggest to you, as you think about how do we go forward at this unique time in our history, right? And the entire business sector is stultified, they're confused, they're lagging. Of course, grocery stores will be an exception to that. There are a few businesses that are doing well for obvious reasons, but most companies, especially in the B2B category, are wondering, when do we get it together? When do we try to crawl to the finish line and get into the end zone, right? I'm using two metaphors there. And growth dynamics can help you get a handle on that and can help you accelerate your vision, help you meet the future. And I suggest that you contact Growth Dynamics. I'm going to spell it for you. It's an unusual URL. Growth, of course, GROWTH, DYNAMIX.org. GrowthDynamics.org will get you out of this sluggish situation that you're in right now. You and many, many, many other companies. Count on it. They've done it before. They'll do it again. GrowthDynamics.org. Please look them up. Thank you so much for sticking with me as we go into the second half of the show. Now, as you probably know, the first half of the show I told you is very interesting. This franchisee for Taco Bell was dealing with some really tough stuff. He'd spent 2 or 3 years trying to get sales up. He couldn't compete in this market area that he was in. Taco Bell corporate was ignoring him. They were kind of in a little bit of a denial. They didn't really believe that things could be that bad. He must be doing something wrong. He's not hiring the right people. All kinds of nonsense that was going on. It finally got to a critical point. And he said, I don't care what anybody says. I'm going to make a bold move. I'm going to do something that's never been done before. And I'm going to leverage what we have, which is the low cost of beans relative to hamburger outlets in particular. Instead of targeting the other Mexican restaurants, he immediately changed his strategic priority and focused on McDonald's, Burger King, other hamburger restaurants. Said, I can get that business because I have lower cost of operations, right? But it got to be a really difficult time. And here we are, coming back to a comment that we made just a few seconds ago, in a very difficult and odd period right here. We're approaching mid-year in 2020 here in the Omaha, Nebraska area. And many companies are sitting around saying, you know, do we keep everybody at home? Do we keep everybody doing this Zoom thing? Productivity is down. Sales are basically nothing. We're not succeeding with sales. Do we come out strong? What do we do now at this particular time? I'd like to talk to you about a situation that is a metaphor for the situation that we're in, right? In 1989, I've already mentioned to you I was working with Taco Bell, but I was in San Francisco in 1989. It's a very odd time to be there. I'm a farm boy from central Iowa, and there I was in the heart of downtown, right? And I enjoyed San Francisco, by the way. It was a very, very interesting place to be. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my bookcase in my office started swaying away from the wall. And my books slowly, it was like in slow motion, began toppling out of the bookcase. Right? And I thought, what's going on here? You know, and my assistant said, Lynn, we're in an earthquake. We're in an earthquake. She rushed in and jumped under my desk. And I realized at that moment that my wife and I lived in a very 25-story apartment building about 2 blocks away, very close to the office. So I ran out of the building that I was in, offices, and began sprinting. I'll never forget this moment, sprinting for about 2 blocks through this gorgeous, beautiful park that we lived adjacent to. And I got through and I'm going, and every morning I would go through that park and I would see these elderly people doing Tai Chi. I'll never forget it. And it was so interesting. I was on the hill and they're doing the slow, graceful, precise movements. And here I was now at this moment, chaotic, right? And there's fires and alarms and people screaming and there's smoke everywhere and buildings are collapsing around me. It was an incredible moment. This was in 1989. It was a 7.2 earthquake in San Francisco. It was the biggest earthquake in modern history in the U.S. Well, anyway, so I get to the other side of the park. I'm very upset, of course, and I get there, and I look up, and there's the 25-story apartment building still there. And everything else is like down and crumbling, and Embarcadero Freeway was like 200 yards away, and there were people crushed in their cars above water, screaming for help. I mean, I cannot tell you how emotional this moment was, right? But I'm yelling for my wife, and sure enough, she's there. There's a big crowd of 500 people. I finally found her, and I told her, I said, how come, after we gathered ourselves a little bit, I said, how come our apartment building isn't down like that one there and that one over there? I'm talking rubble now and fire trucks and people running around. And she said, I heard somebody ask the same question. And she said, apparently about 25 years ago or something, the city made a law that prevented, you couldn't build a skyscraper in San Francisco. I'm talking about back now in the 30s and 40s, I think, is when this all unfolded. Anyway, you can't build a skyscraper without putting rollers, right? Rollers underneath the basement. It was like an infrastructure, right? The very bottom of this massive building. There are rollers down there. And so when the earth moves, as it does predictably now and then in San Francisco, when the earth moves, the building, utilizing physics, of course, redistributes the weight and remains erect. It's genius. Engineering genius. Well, I just couldn't believe it, right? And so we pulled ourselves together, and many other people, and we got through this incredible period, but mostly because of those rollers that were beneath that building. If they weren't there, it wouldn't have been like this. I might not have been here today. Certainly my wife wouldn't have been, that's for sure. Well, I want to talk to you now about COVID-19. I want to talk very bluntly as we wrap up this show. I want you to be aware that we are in an earthquake. We are in an earthquake. And by the way, there were fault lines. There were fault lines we could have taken advantage of and observed and been more sensitive to back in January and February. There were scientists all over the world, in Europe, that knew something bad was happening. It was coming out of China primarily. But we ignored those fault lines. And a lot of people in San Francisco ignored the fault lines that preceded that particular earthquake. But the real question, I want to give this thought to you, and I kind of want you to just, see if you can absorb this for just a moment. I want you to divide the show right now into two halves, all right? Professional, business, personal, all right? So here's the question. What are your organization's buffers? What are the rollers in your company? And you say, well, we had it all handled. Now take a look at how things are right now, right? Because this is the earthquake. We are there. You're standing in front of all the buildings. There's smoke and fire. A lot of people, tragically, dead. Not in Nebraska as much as other places, but still a very tragic phenomenon. May not be done yet. So a lot of people are running scared. Others are fearful, are shutting down. Very few people are thinking creatively right now about what's the opportunity here? What's the opportunity? How do we move? Let's have a plan. Let's get a strategy. Maybe we should buy some competitors, right? Or maybe they should buy us. Because acquisitions and mergers are really high right now, and it represents a strategic move, right? There may be a way to differentiate yourself and innovate at scale, just like I mentioned the Taco Bell franchisee was able to do. So you got to figure out what your rollers are from a business and professional point of view. But I want to tell you as I wrap up here, also there are buffers in your personal life, right? We know that from employees that are struggling with mental illness right now in this situation, very nervous. Numbers are up, unfortunately, for suicides. A lot of real crazy personal behavior going on right now because they don't have any rollers. Could be philosophy, could be religion, could be friendships, could be money, could be the ability to get out of town, although I'm not sure there's a place you can go to avoid this entire pandemic scenario. But I want to just wrap up now and emphasize to you, whether it's the franchisee sitting in Lawton, Oklahoma, he needed rollers, right? Here we are 35 years later, and we're sitting here in front of COVID-19, not sure if it's going to reemerge, don't know exactly how to behave, go back to the office, stay home, shut the company, leave, gear up, get another loan, Who knows, right? You got to have your rollers, your buffers in place, ladies and gentlemen. Right here in WowBiz Nebraska, we're talking about transformation. That's the opportunity in front of us right now. Transformation. So you got to have some people around that actually are typically from the outside and see some opportunities rather than getting sucked into the operational complexity that we are all enduring right now. So this is WowBiz Nebraska. We talk about things nobody else talks about: trends, strategy, evolution, economic development, talent attraction. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker. I want to thank you so much for watching the show. The next time you see me, it'll be equally fresh, equally original, and unusual, but do not ignore the opportunity to get a plan together, get it together now, move forward. Don't sit frozen in front of Netflix one more day. Thanks so very much. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Thank you.